What if your dream vacation, the one you've saved up for and fantasized about for years, could actually trigger a complete psychological breakdown? It sounds like something out of a movie, right? But today, we're diving into Paris syndrome, a very real, incredibly intense phenomenon. It's a wild story about what happens when our deepest expectations collide head-on with reality.
First, let's just picture Paris. For pretty much everyone, the name alone brings up this powerful, almost mythical image. You know, the city of light, romance along the Seine, high fashion on every corner, art that literally changed the course of history. That's the Paris we see in movies, the one we dream about.
Which brings us to the big question, right? How on earth can a place that we all associate with so much beauty and love actually trigger a severe psychological crisis in some people who visit? It just doesn't seem to add up.
And really, to get it, you have to see it for what it is, a true Parisian paradox. The very thing that pulls millions of people to the city, that incredible romantic dream, is, for a small number of them, the exact thing that causes their breakdown.
So what are we actually talking about here? Well, Paris syndrome is basically a really severe form of culture shock. And the key thing is, this isn't just feeling a little let down. It's a condition where the chasm between the idealized Paris in your head and the gritty reality on the ground becomes so huge that it actually triggers a real acute psychological episode.
So what does that even look like? To really decode this thing, we need to dig into the specific symptoms and figure out who seems to be the most susceptible.
And look, these symptoms are no joke. This goes way beyond just being disappointed. We're talking about acute delusional states, hallucinations, and these intense feelings of persecution, this terrifying belief that people are out to get you. Sufferers can feel like the world around them isn't even real, a state called derealization, all while they're battling crippling anxiety and physical symptoms like a racing heart and dizziness.
Now, this is where the story gets a bit more specific, because while this could technically affect anyone, it was first identified and has been most famously documented among one particular group, Japanese tourists. So, why them?
The name itself actually gives us a hint. It was coined way back in the 1980s by Dr. Hiroaki Oda. He was a Japanese psychiatrist working in France, and he was the one who started to notice and formally document this very specific set of symptoms popping up among his fellow countrymen visiting Paris.
Okay, so this gets us right to the heart of the issue, that violent, shocking collision between what you expect and what you actually get. This is the moment where that beautiful, perfect dream just completely shatters.
On one hand, you have the expectation, which is supercharged by the media. Japanese magazines in particular would often paint this picture of Paris as a flawless, idyllic wonderland where everyone on the street looks like they just stepped off a runway. And then you have the reality, a huge, bustling, noisy, and complicated modern city that feels nothing like that fantasy.
You know, Mario Renault from the Franco-Japanese Medical Association, he really hit the nail on the head. He pointed the finger squarely at advertising as a primary cause. The media builds up this incredible, impossible vision, but as he said, in reality, neither Van Gogh nor models are on the street corners of Paris.
Okay, so we know the breakdown happens somewhere in that gap between the dream and the reality. But researchers have actually pinpointed 4 specific factors that all come together to create this psychological perfect storm. Let's break them down.
So, a 2004 study laid out these 4 key ingredients. First up, the language barrier. Not being able to communicate can make you feel incredibly isolated and confused. Second, major cultural differences. The direct, often informal French way of interacting can feel really jarring compared to the more formal Japanese culture. Third, and this is the big one, is that powerful idealization we've been talking about. And finally, you can't forget pure exhaustion. The physical and mental strain of a long-haul flight and jet lag can leave just about anyone feeling psychologically vulnerable.
And what's really wild is that this idea that certain grand, magnificent cities can literally overwhelm a person's mind, it's not new at all. I mean, not even close. As far back as 1656, this physician, Sir Thomas Browne, warned that anyone with an, quote, infirm head should probably avoid getting too infatuated with cities like Venice or, you guessed it, Paris.
So, we've got a handle on what the syndrome is and what seems to cause it. But with a story this dramatic, you know it's going to pick up some myths along the way. So now it's time to separate the facts from the fiction.
One of the biggest claims you'll hear about Paris syndrome is that the Japanese embassy runs a 24-hour hotline just for people suffering from it. But, well, that's just not true. If you actually check with the embassy, they're very clear. No such hotline exists.
And that gets to maybe the most important piece of context here. This is extremely rare. I mean, yeah, it gets a ton of media hype, but a report from the Japanese embassy back in 2006 noted only about 20 cases a year. Now think about that. Over 1 million Japanese tourists visit Paris annually. 20 cases, it really puts the number into perspective. And, hey, it's not exclusively a Japanese phenomenon. More recently, we've seen similar patterns of that deep disappointment among some of the millions of Chinese tourists visiting Paris. They often arrive with this highly romanticized idea of France that they've gotten from books and movies, only to be totally shocked by the reality of it all.
All of this really points to a bigger, broader idea about the traveler's mind. Because Paris syndrome isn't just some weird, isolated curiosity. It's actually a really dramatic example of a whole category of psychological conditions that are tied to travel.
Just think about this comparison for a second. Paris syndrome is triggered by profound disappointment, a beautiful idea being shattered. But then you have its conceptual opposite, Stendhal syndrome. That's where a person is so physically and emotionally overwhelmed by immense beauty, usually art in Florence, that they experience the same kind of symptoms, a racing heart, dizziness. One comes from an ideal that's destroyed, the other from an ideal that's almost too real. Both just go to show how deeply a place can mess with our minds. So, we'll leave you with this thought. Paris syndrome, yeah, it's a rare and extreme case. But it shines a bright light on a really fundamental truth about us. If our expectations for a city can be so powerful that having them shattered can cause a literal psychological break, then how much of our own day-to-day reality, our jobs, our relationships, our happiness, is being shaped not by the world as it actually is, but by the world as we expect it to be?